Dan's talk this morning, our IHWO low for February. Great to have you all here. Strategies for natural speech and conversation. I'm from IH Valladolid, so I shall hand you over to him. Enjoy the workshop, everybody. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Neil, and hi to all of you. Thank you very much for coming. So, my name's Dan. I work at IH Valladolid in northern Spain, and this is a workshop on strategies for natural speech and conversation. As you'll see from the first slide there, I've included my Director of Studies here, Sarah Findley, because this workshop was originally based on one of her Delta essays, so I thought it was only fair she got some credit for the talk. I originally did this workshop as a face-to-face workshop in Valladolid last year with the teachers here, which went very well. So I hope you enjoy today's online version. We're going to look at 5 different areas of natural speech and conversation, both looking at a kind of theoretical perspective of it, why we should be looking at it in the classroom, why we think it's important for our students to get to grips with. And I'm also going to try and give you some practical classroom ideas where we can apply these strategies to our classes. I think the first thing to think about is why this is an important area of teaching and learning for us to look at in the first place. Why are we here today to talk about it? I'm going to put up on the screen a quote from a David Crystal book, which quite neatly sums up some of the difficulties facing our students. I'll give you a few seconds to read it. So I think the point here is not only is it the language, the grammar, the lexis, and the pronunciation, obviously, as well. Not only is all of that an issue for our learners, but another big thing for them is how we structure all of that language to form natural conversation. And I think that's a real challenge for our students. However, I think it's something that we can help them to overcome. Like I said, I work in Spain and I started here about 2.5 years ago. When I first came, my Spanish was quite weak. I'd studied a bit at school, but not very much. And one thing that really frustrated me and took me quite a while to work out was how Spaniards ended informal conversations. To me, as a listener, there just seemed to be a flurry of quite interchangeable phrases, chunks of language that they used. Some of which I could pick out, some of which were a complete mystery to me. And when I came to say bye to someone, I inevitably just stumbled over my words, trying to get these phrases out, which I didn't really understand. And then inevitably just said adios in the end, by which point the other person had already left the conversation. And it was very frustrating for me. And it highlighted the importance of small talk to me, and more importantly, the language that we use to perform small talk, as it were. I don't want to get into a discussion about dogme. This is not what this session is about. But I'm going to put up a quote from Teaching Unplugged, which is the Scott Thornbury and Luke Medding's book about dogme, which puts my point quite nicely. So I think especially with teenagers, maybe older teenagers, and definitely adults, we do spend a lot of our classroom time talking about what could be considered as big issues. Things like culture, the environment, fashion, health, things like that. Sometimes at the expense of the everyday language that actually might be of far more practical use to our learners when they come to communicate either with native speakers or with other non-native speakers in English. And I think we're missing a trick there by neglecting that type of language. One of my Delta tutors last summer was very fond of the expression idle chat, to the point that some of his classes were mainly made up of idle chat, actually. But I think he has a point, and I think it's quite a nice phrase. The unplanned, material-less, informal conversation about our learners and about their lives should play a part in our lessons, and I suppose it's up to us as teachers to make it not idle but meaningful to the students. Having said that, I think we can introduce small talk as planned tasks as well in our lessons. In the chat box on the right hand side of your screen, could you give me some examples of where small talk might occur with a stranger or perhaps an acquaintance? Yeah, Santander, completely agree with you. Sometimes completely unwanted small talk in that case as well. Okay, so thank you very much for your ideas. I think they're all legitimate ideas of where we have all had small talk at one time or another. Here are a few of my ideas, some of which are the same as yours. So at a bus stop, on a train, at the hairdresser. I think I'd made this slide just after I came back from a haircut, so that's why that's on there. And a small shop of some sort. So in terms of a classroom idea, perhaps we could set up different areas of our classroom as, I don't know, 4 or 5 different scenarios where you might have small talk with somebody. Then we could divide our students up between those different scenarios and ask them just to have a short 90-second or 2-minute conversation in their given scenario. We could swap the students around a few times so they get an opportunity to talk in the different settings, and then ask them what topics came up most often. I suspect it would be things like the weather, the weekend, what they were doing that day. Perhaps if there'd been a major news story or something about that. And for each of those topics, we could give them some language, or elicit some language from them and provide them with language to talk about those topics in a more natural way. Then ask students to perform the task again, trying to integrate the new language that we've given them, again going around the different scenarios, having these very short conversations. I'd like to focus a little bit more on this language point now, and I think one area of language that's really important for this type of scenario is adjacency pairs. So an adjacency pair is a pair of utterances, the first one from one speaker, the second from another speaker, where the first one provokes a logical or predictable response from the second speaker. So for example, an invite and an answer would be an adjacency pair, such as, would you like to go for a drink? A logical response to that is, yeah, I'd love to, or sorry, I can't this evening. So that's an example of an adjacency pair. On the left-hand side of this slide, there are the first halves of 4 adjacency pairs that could be useful to students in the scenarios we've just talked about. In the chat box, what could be a response to the first utterance here. Lovely day, isn't it? Okay, I think Ines, you've got it spot on for Valladolid at the moment. Lovely day, still a bit cold. Very much looking forward to it warming up a little bit. Here's my idea. I know, it's really warm. Okay, what about the second one? Say you bump into someone in the street. Hey, long time no see. What might be a nice response to teach students? Okay, again, thanks for your ideas. Here was my suggestion. I know, how have you been? Okay, what about the third one? So again, perhaps someone at a bus stop or a train station, like some of you suggested. Sorry, have you got the time? Some comedians in Santander and Palermo. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so obviously with this one, it depends what the actual time is. Um, okay, yeah, sure. It's now that seems very, very simple, but how many of your students, certainly at lower levels, are saying yeah instead of yes? And again, sure, okay, it's one word, but add that in, and how much more natural does it sound to say, yeah, sure, it's 1:15, rather than yes, it is 1:15. It's it's not revolutionary, but it's just changing small things about what our students are saying to help them sound a lot more natural. And what about the final one? What can I get you? Okay, this is a very subtle way of finding out all of your drinking habits. Nice. All right, so I'll have a whatever, please. So this, I mean, this is fairly simple language. None of these are long utterances. They're very teachable, and they're also, I think, quite memorable just because they're so short, but very, very useful. I think this is incredibly helpful for our students to be exposed to this kind of language and to have the opportunity to use it in class. But how often does this kind of stuff come up in course books? In my experience, not particularly often. And how often do we think of teaching it? Again, in my classes, not often enough, I don't think. Okay, the next thing I'd like to look at is topic shifting, which is defined on the slide here. Just have a read. A really nice activity that I've used in class to raise awareness of topic shifting and of the language that we use to do this is called obsessions. I can't claim to have come up with this, but I can't remember where I got it from, I'm afraid. I'm going to give you a short explanation of how the activity works, and then we're going to listen to an example that I recorded with a couple of my colleagues. So in class, students work preferably in groups of 3 or 4. Each student in a group chooses an obsession, something that they feel comfortable talking about at length. The teacher then chooses one student in each group to start off the conversation talking about their obsession, and it's the job of each speaker within the group to try and turn the conversation back to their obsession. However, they can only do this by linking their topic to something that somebody else has already said, so they can't just randomly butt in, starting talking about their obsession with no link to what's gone on before. They are allowed to interrupt each other, but the objective isn't to dominate the conversation. The objective is to shift the topic back to their chosen subject. We're going to listen to an example, like I say, that I recorded with 2 of my colleagues. The first time we listen, I'd like you to note down what are our obsessions. So there are 3 of us. What are the 3 obsessions that we talk about?
Okay, so in Celebrity Big Brother this week, they had a Okay, so in Celebrity Big Brother this week, they had a shopping task, and they had the Explorers and the Huskies, and they covered all
Speaking
of...
of huskies, I saw some last time I went on a skiing holiday.
Talking of skiing, there was lots of snow in the Celebrity Big Brother house as well. It's
Really?
like fake snow, but then they had like on the screen they had like fake snow coming down. But yeah,
Actually, in the garden centre, in the place where my parents live in Suffolk, they had some. They really go for it with Christmas. They had loads of kind of fake snow all over the.
But there's nothing like Christmas in the skiing resort, because obviously the snow's real, and you've got proper mountains.
yeah.
That's true.
And
that's
it's
true.
cold,
Yeah.
and you've got all the glistening.
It was pretty cold in Suffolk, though. I have to say.
Was it?
Yeah, in the run up to Christmas. Yeah, it was freezing. It was freezing.
Oh yeah, well, have you ever been really, really frozen on top of a mountain? I once
Can't
almost passed out going up a toe. I was so cold, and I wasn't wearing enough clothes.
Yeah.
And I put myself this like really skinny.
Speaking of
little jacket
clothes,
on.
actually, they as part of the task in Celebrity Big Brother, they had to give back all their fancy clothes that they were going to wear for the eviction night. So yeah, they were just wandering around in like their onesies and things like that.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah.
onesies are a bit like ski suits though, because
Yeah,
it's
that's
all
true.
all in one
That's
thing.
true.
Yeah,
Actually,
okay.
at the beginning of when I went home after the summer, my mum did her usual thing of telling me to empty out my wardrobe, and I had to throw a load of clothes out. I took them to the charity shop and everything. And it's quite sad because you kind of look back on clothes that I
Charity
wore when I
shop,
was-
that makes me think of something in Celebrity Big Brother. Linda
Alright.
Nolan, at the moment, she admitted that before she came on Celebrity Big Brother, she was actually on benefits.
Really?
So she had no money at all. Linda Nolan, so one of the Nolan sisters, you know, I'm in the mood for dancing,
Yeah.
song
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything. And yeah, she was on benefits before she went into Celebrity Big Brother.
Wow.
It's pretty
Wow.
cool.
Oh, didn't know that.
No
That's
way.
Yeah.
She looked like the kind of person who would be able to afford a skiing holiday, not that would have to be on benefits.
Totally
Goodness me.
agree with you.
I have to say, where my parents are in Suffolk, there's probably not that many people on benefits, but you do see the odd kind of there's some street musicians and stuff, and you think, oh, I don't know, do they live around here?
Yeah, musicians like Lee Ryan from Blue, because he's in Celebrity Big Brother as well this year.
Any good? I don't know. Is
he
really a musician?
Well, at the moment, it's all about him being in a love triangle with two of the girls.
What were
so
each
he's
of our obsessions?
He's with one. Okay.
Okay, IH Braga and IH Santander, spot on, very good. Yeah, Celebrity Big Brother, skiing or skiing holidays, and mine was, Suffolk. Can't claim to be from there, but it's where my parents live, so. Okay, we're going to listen to that recording again. This time we've got a different task for you. As you're listening, could you write in the chat box any chunks of language you hear that we use to shift the topic of conversation in this recording? So what chunks of language do we use to shift the topic of conversation in our discussion?
Okay, so in Celebrity Big Brother this week they had a shopping task, and they had the Explorers and the Huskies, and they covered all of
Huskies. I saw some last time I went on a skiing holiday.
Talking of skiing, there was lots of snow in Celebrity Big Brother house as well. It's like fake snow, but then they had like on the screen they had like fake snow coming down. But yeah,
actually in the garden centre in the place where my parents live in Suffolk, they had some. They really go for it with Christmas. They had loads of kind of fake snow all over the.
But there's nothing like Christmas in the skiing resort, because obviously the snow's real, and you've got proper mountains.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
that's
it's
true.
cold, and you've got all the glistening.
It was pretty cold in Suffolk, though, I have to say.
Was it?
Yeah, in the run up to Christmas. Yeah, it was freezing. It was freezing.
Oh yeah. Well, have you ever been really, really frozen on top of a mountain? I once almost passed out going up a toe. I was so cold, and I wasn't wearing enough clothes.
yeah.
And I put myself this like really thin.
Speaking
little
of
jacket
clothes,
on.
actually, they as part of the task in Celebrity Big Brother, they had to give back all their fancy clothes that they were going to wear for the eviction night. So yeah, they were just wandering around in like their onesies and things like that.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah.
onesies are a bit like ski suits though, because
Yeah,
it's
that's
all
true.
all in one
That's
thing.
true.
Yeah,
Actually,
okay.
at the beginning of when I went home after the summer, my mum did her usual thing of telling me to empty out my wardrobe, and I had to throw a load of clothes out, took them to the charity shop and everything. And it's quite sad because you kind of look back on clothes that I
Charity
wore when I
shop,
was-
that makes me think of something in Celebrity Big Brother. Linda
right.
Nolan, at the moment, she admitted that before she came on Celebrity Big Brother, she was actually on benefits.
Really?
So she had no money at all. Linda Nolan's one of the Nolan sisters. You know, I'm in the mood for dancing, that
Yeah.
song and
Yeah.
everything. And yeah, she was on benefits before she went into Celebrity Big Brother.
Wow.
It's pretty
Wow.
cool.
No, didn't know that.
No
That's
way.
Yeah.
She looked like the kind of person who would be able to afford a skiing holiday, not that would have to be on benefits.
Totally agree with you.
I have to say, where my parents are in Suffolk, there's probably not that many people on benefits, but you do see the odd kind of. There's some street musicians and stuff, and you think, oh, I don't know, do they live around here? I don't know.
Musicians like Lee Ryan from Blue, because he's in Celebrity Big Brother as well this year.
Any good? I don't know. Is
I don't
he
know.
really a musician?
Well, at the moment, it's all about him being in a love triangle with two of the girls. So he's with one sometimes.
Okay, very good, very good. I think you identified all of the language that we used there to shift topic. Obviously, some of one of the strategies I suppose we used to shift topic wasn't using specific chunks of language, specific expressions, but linking vocabulary as well. So when I was talking about street musicians, and my colleague said, musicians like da 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 da. So it's not really using a different chunk of language to shift the topic, but relating vocabulary to what's already been said. I think this kind of activity would work really well as a test-teach-test type of structure, where you've got students doing the activity to start off with and probably failing to use this language, probably just interrupting each other, or maybe using one expression that they know and just repeating that. Then as students listen to a recording that you can make in 5 minutes with your colleagues, obviously being aware of the levels that you want to use that recording with. Students extract the language from that like we have just done here. Perhaps you give them a transcript or a gap fill, something like that. And then perform the task again, trying to integrate the language that they have just heard in the example conversation. I think if you think carefully about almost any lengthy conversation you have had recently, you'll realize how often we do change topic naturally in conversation. So why don't we teach our students the language to be able to do that themselves in English? All right, here's a question for you. This is a transcript of someone describing an action. Have a read. What do you think the action is that they're talking about? Okay, the idea was frying an egg, I suppose. Could it be poaching? I suppose a fried egg is flatter than a poached egg, so it's supposed to be frying an egg. Anyway, hot liquid. Yeah, I suppose could be oil, could be water. That's a good point. That's a good point. I think the key to the fried egg is that it's flat. Maybe you make flat poached eggs in Santander. Okay, what about this one? Same thing. I know, Palermo, the suspense is unbearable, isn't it? Yeah, good. So changing a flat tire, I think, let's be honest, we would all call the AA in that situation. As I'm sure you've guessed, these are transcripts from the game Taboo, where students, or in this case, a couple of my colleagues, have to describe something, an object, a person, an action, whatever, without using some specified lexis. The speaking strategy that we're looking at here is how we use imprecise language when we can't or don't want to use specific lexis for some reason. I think this is a useful thing for our learners for two reasons. Number one, naturally, our students as non-native speakers have a smaller vocabulary than native speakers. There are just some things they don't know the words for. So having the strategy of using imprecise language is really helpful for them. The second thing is that this is something that native speakers do all the time themselves when we don't know the word for something or when we don't want to be accurate, whatever the reason. So why not try and teach this to our students as well? Thinking back to the two transcripts that you read, can you remember any examples of imprecise language that you saw in those transcripts? Okay, thanks for your ideas. Here are a few, some of which are from the transcript, some of which I've just added off the top of my head. I think one danger with this kind of stuff, these strategies, we mustn't think that they're only for advanced students. Perhaps they're more applicable to higher levels, but I think all students at all levels are aiming for natural conversation to the best of their ability. And although the language might be different to achieve these strategies at different levels, I think the strategy itself can still be developed at almost any level. Here you've got a couple of examples of imprecise language you might teach to higher levels and lower levels as well. In terms of using this in the classroom, I think we can help our students in a couple of ways. First of all, by highlighting this kind of language whenever it comes up. So either in a reading text or more likely a listening text. However, I think we can also be proactive and provide this language to our students if they're struggling for a specific word, and encourage them in class to find ways around language that they don't know, rather than automatically giving them the word that they want to say. Realistically, when our learners come to interact, to communicate in English in the wider world, we're not going to be there, and they're possibly not going to have a dictionary with them. So why not try and teach them how to get round language they don't know in the classroom? It sets them up really well for something that they're going to need to do in their lives. Alright, I end up watching quite a lot of police dramas, crime dramas, stuff like that on Spanish TV. Mostly American, British import, stuff like CSI, Criminal Minds, Castle, that kind of thing. And a while ago, my DOS pointed something out to me about these programs that I haven't been able to kind of not notice now when I watch them. If you watch the scenes in these types of programs where the police officers or the forensics teams or whoever are presenting or describing their investigation to their superior, you'll get one of them who will start off the conversation and they will speak in complete sentences until they get to a full stop, and then they'll stop. And then completely unprompted, another member of the team will take over the conversation, the presentation. Again, they'll speak in complete sentences until they reach a full stop. And then the third member of the team will take over the presentation, again completely unprompted by anybody else. And again, they'll speak until they reach a full stop. And that's it. All of this without so much as eye contact between the characters. And they're doing it as if they can just read each other's minds. Now, obviously in TV programs, this is done for effect, and the actors are actually following a script with full stops in. But it quite nicely highlights another interesting aspect of natural conversation, which is turn-taking. Okay, on this slide are what Bygate recognises as the abilities involved in turn-taking. Just give you a second to read those. I think there are two elements that we need to be aware of here. The first element is the language element. What language do we use to take turns in English? The second is a cultural element. What are the cultural norms of turn taking in different cultures? I mean, living in Spain, the norms of turn taking here baffle me. There aren't any, as far as I can tell. However, I'm sure if a Spanish person went to Britain, they would think the same thing. They would find the norms of turn-taking in, I don't know, a typical British conversation to be very, very different from what they're used to. Okay, Elaine, I know absolutely nothing about Lebanon, but yes, I think this applies to absolutely every culture. There are different norms of how conversations are constructed and held. So perhaps the linguistic element of all of this is easier for us to teach, but we can at least raise awareness of the cultural element of all of this. On the left-hand side of this slide are some different things that we naturally do in conversation that are related to turn-taking. On the right-hand side are some examples of language chunks that we might use to achieve these different things. Take a couple of minutes and see if you can match these up. No, it's okay. Don't need to type the answers. I'm going to put mine up now. See if you agree. Then you're a very skilled conversationist, Andre. Good stuff, Elaine. I'm sure you are. All of you in Beirut. Well done, Santander, as well. I probably wouldn't use this as a classroom activity, possibly with higher level classes. I think it's a bit too, I don't know, maybe theoretical. The stuff on the left-hand side is perhaps not what the students need to be concentrating on. It's the language that that we want them to concentrate on. A couple of points I'd like to make about this. Just one small thing about the second point on there, so reducing the chance of someone interrupting you. The example I gave was there are a couple of points I'd like to make. I think the reason why that reduces the chance of someone interrupting you is that by saying you want to talk about a certain number of things, it creates an expectation in the listener that you're going to talk about, in this case, 2 things before you're willing to give the floor to somebody else. There are 6 phrases on this slide. Obviously, there are loads more that we use to do all these different things. I think an important point to make is that we can't overload our students with these chunks of language. I remember in one of my Spanish lessons here last year, I was given, this was for writing rather than speaking, but I was given 2 or 3 pages, I think, of just a list of kind of discourse markers, conjunctions, linking devices for writing. And I think the teacher thought, fantastic, we'll just give him loads and then he'll be able to use them all. I can't remember any of them because there were so many that I couldn't use all of them, and it was just so unmemorable because I was completely overloaded with them. We need to bear that in mind with this as well. When we're giving our students chunks of language, it should be a kind of drip, 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 not just an enormous stream of language that we throw at them. Giving them 2, 3, 4 chunks of language in a class, and then maybe at a later date giving them a bit more, and then it's a continuous thing. We can't teach all of this in one go, I don't think. Obviously, there's a lot more language, like I said, that we can use. These are just a few of my examples. But I think if we can help our learners to add this kind of stuff to their repertoire, they'll be much better placed to take part in a natural conversation. All right, the last area that I'd like to look at is telling anecdotes. Anecdotes play a key part in conversation, and yet from personal experience of living in Spain and living in France before that, I've always been, I don't know, a bit reluctant to tell stories and anecdotes in conversation. I think I've always been worried that I wouldn't have the vocabulary to tell the anecdote, or that I'd get to the end and I wouldn't know how to say the punchline, let's say, of the story. And I think it's a natural reaction with everyone looking at you, waiting for you to finish this funny anecdote. And then you can't because you don't have the language, or it ends up being so disjointed that no one can follow the story. And it's just a bit humiliating, really. So I think it's natural to shy away from stuff like this in L2. However, in class, I think we have the opportunity to help our students with this. On this slide, we can see the different elements of a typical anecdote. Not that every anecdote you've ever told has followed this, or necessarily in this order, but nevertheless, it's an interesting structure to think about. I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote, and for each of these 5 components, the abstract, the orientation, the complicating or remarkable event, the resolution, and the coda, I'd like you to just note down what I say for each element. Obviously, you're not going to be able to write down word for word what I say, but what is the gist of my orientation? What's the gist of the complicating or remarkable event? Again, this doesn't need to be in the chat box. This can just be wherever you want. So, I had a bit of a nightmare on a train journey once. I was living in France at the time in Saint-Étienne, near Lyon, but I'd been to Berlin for a long weekend to visit a mate of mine who lived there. And I decided it would be a good idea to get the train home all the way from Berlin down to kind of southeast France, because it was slightly cheaper than taking the plane. Okay, Palermo, no problem. Thank you very much for coming. This will be up on YouTube at some point if you want to watch the last 15 minutes of it at some point, but thank you for coming. So I had taken a train from Berlin, travelled all the way down through Germany. I got to Basel on the German-Swiss border, and I needed to change trains. We arrived in Basel about 10 minutes early. I didn't really think anything of it, got off, walked down to the concourse, and couldn't see my next train. Bit worrying. So I went to the kind of booking office and asked, and the woman said, yeah, there are 2 stations in Basel, the German station and the Swiss station. You've got off at the wrong one. Good. So ran back up to the platform to try and get back on my train. Got there just as it was pulling out. So I started to panic a little bit, ran back down into the station and outside, jumped in a taxi and explained in very, very stilted German that I needed to get to the Swiss station in like 10 minutes. And to be fair to the guy, he pelted through the centre of Basel. I've never seen anyone drive like it. We got to the Swiss station, got out, paid him, sprinted into the station, found my platform, and got there just as my next train was pulling out. And I distinctly remember just chucking my suitcase on the platform and swearing fairly loudly at the train for a while, getting some very odd looks from people around me, until I eventually calmed down. I went back up to the booking office, where an incredibly helpful woman who spoke excellent English sorted me out with a train a bit later in the evening. And I, via Geneva, Lyon, and then Saint-Étienne, I did eventually get home after about 16 hours, I think, on the train. And in hindsight, really should have just paid to take the plane. You'll be glad to know I have learnt my lesson. Okay, so just have a think for 30 seconds. What did I talk about for each of these 5 components of the anecdote? All right, let's have a look together then. So my abstract, my kind of intro to the story, I had a bit of a nightmare on a train journey once. Obviously, in the context of this workshop, it was just a bit random. I just started it. In a conversation, obviously, there would be a link to something that someone else had said, like we were talking about in the topic shifting part of this workshop. I then gave you some background, an orientation. I was travelling back to Saint-Étienne from Berlin, where I'd been to visit a friend. Then the events, definitely complicating rather than remarkable, nonetheless. Basically, I got off at the wrong station in Basel and missed the next train. Obviously, I gave you a lot more detail than that, but that was the gist of the event. The resolution, there was a really helpful woman at Basel station who sorted me out with another train, and I eventually got home after 16 hours of travelling. The coda, the moral of the story, should have paid for the plane ticket. Obviously, I added in quite a bit more detail for each of these. Nonetheless, the structure was there, and I think making that structure explicit to students is handy for them. Okay, a few more things that I'd like to say about anecdotes. As I said before, the ability to tell anecdotes is not particular to English. It's universal, but it doesn't always translate into L2. And like I said, I think making the structure and the language that we typically use for each part of the structure, making all that explicit to our students might help them. Secondly, anecdotes for obvious reasons are fantastic practice for past narrative tenses. The one I just told you was full of past simples, past continuouses, past perfects, present perfects. But also it's really good practice for learner-focused lexis because it's personal. These are stories that have actually happened to our learners and stories that they want to tell. So even if the lexis is kind of specific, maybe not applicable in that many circumstances, it's personal and therefore more memorable. So what a fantastic opportunity for our learners to look up some things that are really useful and meaningful to them. Thirdly, I think anecdotes encourage students to take longer turns when they're speaking, which I think can only be a good thing. And lastly, I know certainly on my CELTA a few years ago, teacher talk time was similar to the devil. It was the worst thing that could happen in a lesson was the teacher talking too much. I think in this case, teachers